Right, okay, so thank you for joining the webinar this evening, Employer Brand Our Opportunity. I've got two fantastic guest panelists with me today as well. I'm going to introduce properly in a second, but a little bit about me first. So my name's Steve Keith. I'm the founder and Chief Behavioural Officer at The Branding Man. It's an agency that I set up 2 years ago, which came from a desire from myself to focus more broadly on employer branding. Before I set up the agency, I'd spent 8 years working at the Global Professional Services EY. Part of my journey involved Stephen, who I'll introduce in a second.
Very smart.
And I focus predominantly on apprenticeship recruitment, and the kind of the mission that I'm on is to bridge that communication gap that I see in the market between the way that we talk about the world of work and the way that young people understand or need to understand the world of work. Because I feel like as adults, sometimes we feel like we're explaining it well, but we're actually leaving a generation and we're causing a generation rather to be disadvantaged because they don't have a clue what we're talking about, essentially. So that's where I come from. So that's a little bit about me. So I'll ask both of our panelists to introduce themselves. So Stephen, as I just mentioned you then, do you want to start?
Sure. Hi everyone, my name's Stephen Brand. So I have led a rich and varied career in and around employer brand. Started creative agency side, and then via a contact there had the opportunity to move in-house with EY. So again, cross paths with Mr. Keith there. Was there, got then a role over at Deloitte. So again, running their employer brand in-house for a couple of years. Really interesting, really fascinating. Those kind of organizations seen from the inside, looking out, very, very different, very different world. Moved to Randstad Sourceright, so the RPO world then, so kind of neither one nor t'other, neither sort of in nor out, kind of one leg in, one leg out. So again, an interesting perspective. Built the employer brand practice for EMEA there for Randstad, and then more recently have been at AIA doing a couple of roles. So led a client team and managed the global relationship for Accenture, which is a whole different world of pain and challenge. And then transitioned into a role that focused a little bit more on the audiences and the channels we were using. So who exactly our clients were trying to reach, how you identify those audiences, what do they do online, and therefore how do you get in front of them at the right time. So kind of, yeah, here, there and everywhere. What I really love to do that I haven't done enough of in the last couple of years is that focus on the sort of the employer brand, on the reputation an organization has, on the ways that that organization can help to manage and direct that brand towards their ends.
Yeah, totally. Thank you, Stephen. And Nate.
Yeah, I'm Nate Guggia. I lead brand marketing for a creative studio called Job Portraits. We're technically based in the Bay Area in the United States, but we are a fully distributed team. We have been from the beginning. So we're kind of all over the place, but the vast majority of our clients are growth stage tech startups, Bay Area based, or at least Bay Area HQ'd. And I think I definitely have the least amount of experience of anybody on the call. I think optically people actually think I have a lot more experience than I do. It's because I'm so active on LinkedIn and, you know, I've created this kind of persona thing, but I'm extremely passionate about the industry, and I was lucky enough to stumble upon it. I spent most of my career in sales and marketing roles and spent a little bit of time in recruiting, really became passionate about widening access to meaningful work through recruiting. Then looking for jobs, I stumbled across Job Portraits. And I spent a little bit of time previous to recruiting where I was selling into creative agencies, and I absolutely fell in love with creative work. And I thought, man, I want to work for an agency. I just don't know how or, you know, what to do. And I came across Job Portraits and I had no idea what they did. I just loved their vibe. They're very, very human. And I was like, wow, this is creative work that touches recruiting. And then once I got into it and I started connecting some dots between what employer brand is and how it relates to marketing, like it just took off for me. And I have become extremely passionate about it. And I think, like, you know, Steve, you talked about your mission. And I think ultimately it comes down to that, is like, I really, at this point in my career, I really want to help companies widen access and especially the companies that we work with, when you're talking about, like scale ups, I think, as you refer to them, but those stage of companies, there isn't a lot of access, and there's not a lot of opportunity to a wide variety of people who are really trying to reinvent themselves and work for these amazing companies. But the window of opportunity is about this big. And so that's underlying everything that I do. That's like really what's like the fire inside of me right now.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Great introduction. Thanks, Nate. And I think that touching on what you were just saying there as well, I think is timely for today, because in the UK, our Chancellor's given more news about how the job support package is going to work with everything that's going on with the coronavirus at the moment. And I feel like there are already a lot of people that are out of work, either by choice or being made redundant, and they're having to look at different options they might not have looked at before. They might have already spent time over the last 6 months looking at reskilling and then thinking, well, where am I going to actually use these skills now? And so I think it's kind of the reason why I wanted to have this discussion today, which was because I've been looking for the last 6 months and seeing everything that's been changing and going, well, there were probably, in my opinion, some things that were working and weren't working already. And this, in a way, has, albeit kind of not in the nicest of ways with everything that's happening around the world in terms of the impact that it's having on mortality, but that actually there's opportunities. I'm a big optimist, so I'll always look at the good side of things and the opportunities. And there were certain things for me that were starting to get stuck with recruitment that needed some reinvention, which is maybe a better way of putting it. So what I would do is I'll start with, because I think maybe some people have joined today's discussion and not really understood what employer brand is. So the first question I'm going to put to both of you is, how would you actually define employer branding, and why do you think it's an important part of talent acquisition? Who would like to go first?
Nate, if you want the floor, I'm happy to yield it.
Hey, yeah, sure. All right. I'll lead it off. Then you'll fill in all the gaps here. To me, your employer brand is the perception that candidates and employees have about what it's like to work at your company. And I think I think it's really important to understand that perception exists regardless of what you do. Whether you put out a fancy video or you stay quiet about an important topic, that perception is there. Mm-hmm. And I think employer branding is an attempt to influence that perception. And I think the word influence sometimes can have a negative connotation. And in this case, it absolutely doesn't. It just means like taking the initiative and putting out information that these two groups, because I really think employer branding serves two markets, internal and external, and it's putting out information that they don't otherwise maybe see. Because I think both of those groups have blind spots when it comes to aspects of an organization. So anyway, so I look at it from like its perception. Really.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I use the word reputation, but that is exactly the same. Yeah. It is exactly what people think it's like. Either think it's like based on a personal reality, I've been through it, or they think it based on what they hear, what they read, what's written in the newspapers, what's online. You build a perception, as you say, that exists whether you're in that conversation or you choose to keep yourself separate for it. The employer brand management is your opportunity to direct that conversation to make sure your side of that story is told. And I guess, so the reason it always or often, in my view, mistakenly gets sort of subsumed as a subset of talent acquisition is because the guys in TA, if they're doing TA well, TA is that full funnel kind of relationship. So it's very early scene setting. You want to start to build and nurture relationships with talent groups that you might not need now, but you suspect you will in a few years. And so you start that relationship early. If you're smart, you're thinking about starting that relationship now for conversion later, but you're also lower down the funnel thinking, I need to convert people. Because you own that funnel, and certainly towards the top part of that funnel, that's where the stories and the content and the experiences that the employer brand team should own can get told and live. So I think, again, when we think about why there's that sort of very close relationship between TA and employer brand, it's I think because they often own the people that we want to talk to.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, can I just add one thing to that? In the world, in like the startup world, even with like the fastest growing, most funded companies, employer brand will typically sit on top of somebody else's role. So it's like, hey, this stuff is important. We should start thinking about it. Who wants to take it? And then it's just like committee, you know, and somebody raises their hand and goes, okay, I like this, or I want to take it on. And that could be anybody from like a head of talent or a head of people or some recruiting ops or something, you know, and they're balancing at these companies a tremendous workload with a lot of pressure. Mm-hmm. So employer branding typically doesn't get the visibility and the care that it actually needs. So you're talking about somebody who can dedicate maybe 20% of their time to it. But as a result, because it sits in those functions, it is so closely related to recruiting at that level of a company. I think like once you get into larger, more mature organizations, employer branding can take on a whole new meaning and impact a wider set. It could be everything from like an internal communications function to helping talent acquisition at the same time. But I think like a lot of times startups will think of it like, how can we recruit better? That's what employer branding is going to help us do.
Yeah, I would speak to both of those points, and kind of going back to the time that we spent like working together, Steve. And I think I always look back at the time at EY. I look back at it fondly, but I also look back and go, okay, well, we were in a very privileged position in that team, because there were at one point, I think there were at least 7 or 8 of us that were all focusing on employer brand, and we had a leader in that team who was very fierce if anybody tried to pull us away from focusing solely on that, didn't we, Stephen? Yeah. And she was fantastic at championing that within the business and being able to show the business case for it. Whereas I know in the areas that I focus in, particularly around apprenticeships, sometimes that a lot of even the direct competitors of companies can have completely different models, and they can be looking at a recruiter can be having an end-to-end role, and employer brand is just a sprinkling over the top of what they're asked to do. So it doesn't necessarily, which is what you were speaking to there, I think, Nate, as well, it doesn't necessarily get the attention that it needs, because we know that it is a big piece of work, and it's an important piece of work. If you're talking about perceptions there, and you're talking about reputation management and trying to do that because you're building a talent relationship early, people just don't make career decisions at the drop of a hat. They certainly won't be at the moment. And there's almost this mentality sometimes, I think, that it's just, I've heard it before, where some people have just said, well, just send a tweet, that will get applications. And it's like, well, it will get you applications. I mean, I only have to look at LinkedIn today and see that some jobs have already had 600 applications to them at the moment. So it clearly works just to click apply now, but is that the right way to go? We've got a point here from Neil. So the point about the struggle to make the internal case for employer branding. So what advice would you give to practitioners about raising its profile?
Well, I think there are a couple of things worked pretty well at Deloitte. So if we're talking about instances where it's been about trying to raise it internally, then a couple of things were helpful. One is numbers. So maybe it's because Deloitte's an accountancy firm, they're naturally towards numbers, but being able to illustrate the challenges, the problems the business was facing from a recruiting point of view, that we felt employer branding could support. So that's not so much a lack of applications, but more the cost of running through the huge numbers of applications for people that just wouldn't be right necessarily for the firm. So again, if we think about what employer branding should really be trying to do, it should be absolutely, well, in my view, it should be universal awareness. Everybody knows who you are. Hardly anyone wants to apply as a result of the things you've told them. So it's that everybody come and find out about us, because that will tell you whether you're the 1 in 100, 1 in 1,000 that would really want to work here, that's right fit for us. Without that, what you have potentially, particularly at maybe early talent levels or volume hiring levels, is you do have 1,000, 2,000, 5,000 applications. So you're then having to, it's very relatively easy to apply a resource cost to each of those that will inevitably result in a rejection, and start to then show incrementally over time this hidden cost I don't think the business really thinks about. You can start to pull this hidden cost out into the light. And again, if you're a firm of accountants, you start doing that, that widens the eyes and they're interested. So I think that's very, that was very helpful. And certainly from the Deloitte experience was, again, talking in their language a little bit more. So again, and Nate, I'm sure you'll hear this and feel this, that it will sometimes get lampooned or lambasted as it's a marketing thing, it's a fluffy thing, it's just a creative, a pictures thing. It's not a business thing. And actually, you're like, what you could be more wrong, but it would be difficult to be more wrong than that. This is, if you don't get the right people doing the right job and being happy doing it, your business will fall over regardless of what business you're in. So you absolutely need to get all of this stuff right. You can't afford not to. It is a business imperative. But being able to talk in that language that links the effect you would expect to have with where the business wants to go and how the business wants to get there. Again, I think in terms of building credibility internally, which can often be the challenge as much as getting the audience, is being a credible professional in their eyes when you sit down in front of them, is being able to speak in that language and be confident about the impact you would expect to have. I don't think we should, I think rather for too long we've been a bit more retiring about who we are and what we do, and a bit quieter, and I think we should be a bit louder. Honestly, I think we should be a bit more verbose and a bit more direct and a bit more confident about the kind of impact we would expect our work to have. And I think that gains attention. Sometimes the attention you might not want, because then they want results and they know who to come knocking for when they do. But I think it's good. It's good visibility.
Oh, yeah. You said a number of really great things right there. Okay, so I'll answer this from just a slightly different perspective, because that's what I have. So I think if we're talking about companies, I hate to generalize too much, but I think many companies don't know what employer branding is outside of the bubble, outside of the handful of people who care. It's not like the engineering team or the sales team or the marketing team or whatever is like thinking about employer branding. And a lot of times their reaction to it would be like, wait, we have this and what is it, kind of thing. And there is a lot to be said about rallying the troops around this initiative, about getting excitement little by little to help build the credibility, and leveraging employees and function leaders to support the person leading this initiative and starting to get it recognized and noticed. And so I put a lot of value on small, quick wins, because small, quick wins are easy to execute, they're highly actionable, and they show your work. And they also show your worth. So if you start thinking about it from like a content perspective, coming to somebody in a function that is a high priority and saying like, hey, I want to write a story about one of your people, or I want to write a story about your function leader, whatever. Just like, hey, let me do it, right? And then showing them like, oh, like this is the deliverable. Look at, like, that person will feel the care. They'll start to like contextualize what this stuff actually is in their own mind, and then it can help spread. And I think there's a lot of leverage that can be applied at the function level. When you get function leaders who really start caring about this stuff, they have a lot of credibility, especially when you're talking about like a VP of sales or VP of engineering or things like that. They have a lot of pull in that company. So I think like sometimes, it's like, hey, I want to go like all in on something. And like my approach actually is like, hold back, do something small that you can execute on to start proving this little by little, because you're not going to change this thing overnight. But it'll definitely get the wheels in motion.
Yeah, I think the pilot approach is absolutely with smaller organisations. I'm sure also with some of the larger ones is just infeasible to change everything overnight. But it is feasible to take pockets and demonstrate impact and return, and then be able to show, well, what if we extrapolated that out 100 times, 200 times, and then I think the cogs can start to turn by themselves. You also develop that momentum, and crucially, I think this is really important. Nate, that you were saying that it engages the internal people, and if they are, for any work you're doing, yes, it's kind of, there's a bit that's external, but keeping the people you already have engaged and understood and close to what you're doing is absolutely vital, and that's a real tangible, obvious way of doing it, by involving them in the process.
Yeah, and they get excited to share this stuff. It's organic sharing. When somebody's excited, they want to tell others about it, which is like when it comes into employer branding, that's like the code that everyone's trying to crack, is like, how can we create stuff that our people care enough about to share on their own, not with like any kind of program, not with nothing. They just want to do it on their own. And when you can do that, you can accomplish a lot of things. I actually have a question for you guys.
Well,
Sorry, Steve. I don't mean to hijack this thing.
That's go for it, Nate.
It's just something that I've been thinking about a lot. If let's say the mindset at the top just isn't there, it's just not, and there's plenty of companies where that's the case. Is this a lost cause? And if it is, that's okay. I don't think you should always try to sell somebody who's not sellable.
I don't think it is a lost cause. I think if I give you an example, so, and it's speaking to what you were talking about, with small quick wins and showing your worth there, and almost creating champions of people that slowly start to trickle. So I think it was back in 2016, 17, we had a change in the managing partner for talent in the firm, and I'd already had great success working with the predecessor. She'd been a school leaver herself, so it made it easy to engage her in a way, because she'd come from that lived experience that we were trying to market outwards. So anytime you asked her to do anything, she was falling over to help with that. And the new partner that I was working with was a little bit more hesitant, was risk averse in some ways, but there was an opportunity, and the opportunity was that we were marketing vacancies within the firm to 16 to 18-year-olds, and she had 2 children that were 16 and 17 years old. So involving her in the campaign that we were working on, which was targeting the influencers of young people, their parents, was a great way to be able to get her on board. And then she almost became a kind of like leader of the charge amongst senior leadership within the business, so that whenever anybody kind of questioned additional budget that was needed for campaigns of the scale that we were running, when we are talking with a big professional services firm, so the budget was there at times to be able to push that envelope a bit further than you would in a smaller organization. But on the flip side, if you go down, kind of was entry level talent. So one of the first things I remember doing when I joined UI was speaking to the actual apprentices that were already there themselves and setting them up as ambassadors, and just having that confidence to give them access to the Twitter channel for a day a week, for them to just share stuff. Didn't cost anything. They could share their experience. It was authentic, and it then created a model which you could scale up across the business, which then naturally people become more interested because they're curious about why somebody's sharing pictures or asking them to talk about what their day that they're doing and things, and you get that momentum and that snowball effect going. That would be kind of what I would speak to. How about you?
Yeah, well, I think sort of leadership, to a degree, they are a suit being filled that is temporary. So employer brand should be like a real long-term investment. I know we want to show quick wins early, but really to do it well, it's kind of a long-term investment. So there were times, certainly at Deloitte, where if you hit a block at the partner level, then you would go, well, that's fine. That guy's gone in 5 years anyway. My concern will be with senior managers and directors, with their approach, their attitude, their behaviors. If I can influence those, I'll influence the direction of the firm for the next 10, 15 years. If I influence this guy here, okay, fine, that's 24 months, but that's kind of the limit. So I think leadership, inclusion, leadership, involvement can be hugely beneficial, can speed things along. I think if you hit blockers, there are kind of other ways to go, and partly that might just be ignoring certain people and finding ways around them. If you're determined enough, like I say, whether you start at the bottom or just move sideways, there'll be other people you can find, and the chances are, once you have the opportunity to then start to show some of that impact, then I think that's where I think you'll get a change. Because I would imagine quite often the not wanting to engage is going to be more around, well, where's the proof? Where can I be sure? I'm not sure it's the right investment of my time. I'm not sure it's the right investment of my money. So de-risk it for me, and I'm in. They probably don't have some deep-seated philosophical objection to it. More, it doesn't feel right to me at the moment. So prove it, come back, and do it. So you just have to find some people that you can go and prove it with.
Yeah, that's true. I think it's going back to the question that you were asking there, Neil, as well, watching around that internal case as well. One of the final role that I had AUI before I left to set up Branding Man was it was leading on marketing communications, and it was straddling that internal and external piece and doing that brand work from the inside out. And the struggle with the internal piece was largely a lot of the time that even if you can secure space within internal communications for something to be shared, that you look at and go, this is amazing, people need to see this, this is how we're going to get that ripple effect going through the business. There's lots of people within the business that are trying to share things at the same time. You're not the priority, or kind of when you want to be the priority, it can get lost when people are just scrolling through lots of messages that are going out. And I remember having a really interesting conversation with the head of internal comms one day, where she'd literally done a piece of analysis of what content was working and what wasn't. And there was a very clear line between the two things that people were responding to, and it was compliance messages, where some people were being told they had to do something by a certain deadline. I mean, it was a firm of accountants, so there was a lot of that anyway. But also as well, stories that were being shared. And it wasn't even necessarily stories that were being created to be used in employer branding, to be fair. It was just that human element. I think sometimes with employer branding, the struggle and the opportunity in a way is that you've got your left and your right brain thinking, and a lot of people that you may encounter that are either in senior positions or the budget holders or looking for that ROI are going to go to the left side of the brain, the left side, and not miss the right side. No, it's important, but sometimes there's a sense of urgency. And employer branding for me, sometimes I was having this conversation with somebody this afternoon actually, isn't something that can be done quickly. Would you agree or not?
Do you want to go? Yeah.
Well, I mean, it probably shouldn't be done too quickly, I think. Again, it kind of, I would guess, depend on where you sort of put your fence to say this is employer branding and this isn't. But it shouldn't really be started without a certain amount of groundwork having been done to really understand the business. So for the large part, I think the management and the direction of an employer brand should be owned by the organization itself, but there is a point at the very beginning where you need to let somebody else have a look and tell you the bad news, because there'll probably be bad news, and you know, as an employee of that organization, you will rightly think twice before standing up in front of the board and going, here's a bunch of things you do really badly. Having somebody else as that scapegoat is really helpful, but you need that honest view if anything's going to change. And I think, again, the goals we should be setting, the objectives that the employer brand can influence, which I think can run all the way through to the performance levels that people hit, and therefore the revenue targets the business hits and the profitability and things. You should be able to kind of draw a line, I think, between some of the work employer brand does and the performance, the real bottom line performance of the business. But that absolutely would take time. I think it's kind of, to Nate's point, it's a combination of, look, this is the strategy. So this is where, with the right level of investment direction, we will be in 3 years. This is how we know we're getting there every 3 months. So this will be where we are in 3 months, and 6 months, and 9. So Mr. Business, Mr. Budget Holder, that we're moving, that we're tracking, that we're where we want to be. But it's as part of this 3-year plan, and really you need to commit to doing all of those steps to get to over here. And that's where I think we can have the real impact, because otherwise the risk is we become campaign led, and it's the thing that people think you can switch on and off. And obviously then in times like we have now, and you're looking around for the lights to switch off to save a few quid, and you see the employer brand team, you go, brilliant, don't need as many people anymore, switch. Well, no, you've completely misunderstood. But if you're not, again, positioned in the business the right way, it's too late to have that conversation when someone's sort of finger is hovering over the button. You need to already be there.
Yeah, I think you're right. Like with that mentality, Stephen, they're trying to make employer branding conversion marketing. It's like, it's not that. It's something totally different. It's about like positioning your company and your people to be top of mind and part of the conversation when the conversation's ready to happen. It's not about like trying to force conversations. It's not about any of that kind of stuff, but it's easy when we're talking about like numbers, right? Numbers seem to like want to force something to happen. Another thing I was thinking about too is that, I think companies in general, they need a lot more show and tell. We're a small company and we still are very siloed, especially now we have multiple business units. And we realized that each business unit and the people involved in that don't know what the other person is really working on. And so we've incorporated this like show and tell time where somebody from one team presents what they're working on or what the team is working on and the other team does it. And I've heard this, this kind of thing, implemented at larger companies because, Stephen, to your point, like this is definitely a long-term thing. I mean, 3 years isn't even that long when we're talking about like the scope of business in general, but compared to tomorrow it is. And if employer brand or if marketing or CS or any department has an opportunity to show and tell what they're working on, it connects everybody and everybody understands the value that they're bringing to the organization instead of going, hey, what's employer brand doing over there? Why are they asking us for money? And you can show this strategy, the longer term thing, and then how the little things that you're doing along the line map back to that. I think I just want more of that. I want more visibility into everything that all people are doing.
Yeah, I think that's exactly, because I think one of the challenges I've always found with employer brand a little bit is we can take part of the credit for an awful lot of good stuff, but all of the credit, virtually none. We influence and help and support and guide certain things to happen, whether that's the retention of good people, the quicker development because we're hiring more of the right people, or we're converting, we're improving quality because people understand whether they're right for the firm, they apply at the right time. So those conversion metrics are all great. If we're doing good work on social, the sentiment analysis and stuff is all great, but very little of it are we in sole charge of and can we take sole credit for. So a challenge I still have is how you position employer brand and the extent of the impact it has, knowing that you're contributing towards a lot of successes, but there aren't that many of them that you can throw your arms entirely around and claim this is just us, this is all us, no other helped at all, this is all me. And that's a difficult thing to do because you're collaborating and you're borrowing and you're working together with teams to, like you said, the show and tell, you want to bring people together to sort of share these things, so there's credit all over the place. So sometimes the challenge can be being very clear about what we are responsible for and what we will deliver. We rely on the support and help of other people across the organization to do it. And I've yet to see any research that can really unpick all of that stuff and say this just by itself is what EB will deliver. But I know it's big.
Yeah.
I just don't know. You can't really sort of pin how big.
Yeah. I have some thoughts on that. So I don't think it's one thing. I don't think it should be one thing. And I think anybody who wants it to be one thing isn't understanding what brand is. Separate the employer side of it. There are so many interactions that a person, whether it's a customer, potential employee, that they have with your brand, whether that's your corporate brand, your employer brand, whatever. There's so many interactions. And to look at this and go like, oh, this is the one thing that it did, or this is where they converted at, whatever, is just so short-sighted and not understanding that like, this is about influence. And influence takes a lot of like shapes and forms. And I think it takes an understanding of like what this is from the beginning to then go, okay, we're going to start looking at all the ways this influences. Like there's a high likelihood that a new customer came on board because they saw something that came from employer branding. Yeah. That for sure happens.
Yeah.
But you don't know if that happens necessarily unless that person tells the sales rep, like, hey, I saw this great piece of content or this video, or I saw an employee of yours post and it resonated. So it made me check out your company and it made me then do a demo that made me then buy it. Like that's super qualitative. And I think like there needs, and I know this isn't easy and I'm not saying like I have the direct solution for it, but I really think that qualitative data holds a lot of the answers to this. And that happens through conversations. And it happens through conversations with sales teams and recruiting teams and whoever, and going like, hey, what are you hearing about the employer brand?
Yeah, I think you're right. I think one of the questions was about sort of the barriers that we're looking to tackle with it. One of the things I got there was sort of the knowledge barrier. So I think there is that knowledge barrier. But again, we sort of start with a definition because I think appreciate individually that there are different ways of looking at it, and you might have still out in the market multiple definitions of the employer brand concept, never mind sort of where it sits and the structure and hierarchy around it. There is then a knowledge barrier about how well people across the organization understand what it is and where it fits in and where it can support. Particularly, I think you're right when you're talking about attribution and things and the influence it can have. I mean, every careers website I've ever looked at the statistics of has way more visitors and people tracking from there through to corporate than corporate does through to careers. So there's a lot of traffic that you're constantly moving through your site that's going to be influencing, like you say, customer and client decisions, and relatively little vice versa. But when you're looking at, we always used to, attribution would always show, and you'd sit down every month, you look at it and go, whoa, Google's doing brilliant. And you're like, yeah, but really, people have already made their decision. They go, what was that great job? What was that great job? Google it. And then Google gets the tick and goes, yeah, thank you, I'll have that dollar. And you're like, oh, no, but that's not really what made the decision. The decision was made elsewhere. How can I track and follow how that decision was made? And I think now, obviously, things are a lot better. But again, without that knowledge internally to really appreciate, as you say, Nate, that journey of getting to know an organization, how exactly all of those little interactions, what decision they pushed, even if that decision was a month later or 6 weeks later, one thing caused another to happen. It's just, I can't follow the cookie, but it did happen. How do I show that? Because that's really where you're getting into the scope of the impact that the work can have.
Yeah, and you're right with that, Stephen. I think back to kind of time kind of reporting on things with apprenticeships and everything, that we would have questions on the ATS when applicants were applying of kind of, how did you hear about us, to try and track that. And you'd know that you'd done, especially in the student market, hundreds of events that they probably met you at first, or it was probably a tweet that somebody sent, or a Facebook post, or an Instagram, or something, where that was the initial light bulb moment. That when they're in situ and on the computer, it's in front of them. Websites were always kind of like high up there on the list, and we would always sit there and question it and be like, well, was that really the first time you heard of us? It's hard to track that, but we mean, especially right now as well. And so kind of one of the questions I had was kind of around examples of best practice as well. We're living in a very dominant digital base with employer branding at the moment because of everything that's going on.
Mm-hmm.
What have you two both seen in terms of best practice that stood out for you, either recently prior to Corona, but over the last kind of 6 months that we could be learning from?
I mean, there are just a couple that I've noted down. I haven't sort of, I think there's probably been a little bit less stuff happening in organizations, certainly pushing stuff externally less. Hopefully more are doing more internally around sort of looking after the people they've got. But things like the, so the thing that Accenture did, they sort of basically got a load of their people to build out a platform that would help clients that were letting people go link up with clients of theirs that were hiring people in this sort of internal job marketplace. And that sort of, to me, was good practice, because that's authentically Accenture. That's what they do. It's innovation, technology, client-led. That's what they do. It wasn't a reaction necessarily, or an out of character reaction to the fact it was a pandemic and how can we do something to get us some PR. It was more that fits them because that's all they think about is tech and innovation and clients. And so that was a perfect example. The EY stuff that they've been doing in the last couple of weeks, again, with the recruiting teams, helping people with improved CVs and position themselves to get back into the jobs market, again, is great, because to me, and knowing what I know about EY, that's who they are. So that is perfectly on brand. It's not, again, a grab because we're in a strange time and sort of an opportunistic thing. It's that's who they are. This is a natural expression of who they are. So of course they would do that. If PwC had done that, that feels a bit weird because they're a bit grayer than EY. They're a bit more straight. That doesn't feel quite right. And then sort of the Amazon, like hiring day 30,000 people or something, and that was one that you thought, wow, that's really smart, and obviously you've got big numbers and there's loads of great sessions. And that was one that jarred a little bit more, because you're like, that doesn't feel so natural for Amazon to do that. A good thing to be doing, and you've obviously got big hiring numbers to hit and you've got the technology to run it, so great, but it didn't feel as natural an expression of who they are as an organization as the EY one and the Accenture one. So to think about best practice, it's really who are you and how have you adapted, or how are you making use of the environment we've like to be helpful to people. And those two, Accenture and EY, to me stood out as ones where there was kind of a natural, well, of course they would do that. Oh, what else were they going to do? Which feels like really natural to the brand.
Yeah.
That's making me think Lever, the ATS Lever, they did something similar where they were showing huge running list of companies who are hiring and things like that. I really like that. I thought a lot about this, and I wanted to, there's a couple companies that stand out. The thing that I'm most interested in right now is this link between personal brand and employer brand. And there's a couple companies or people that I think are doing a really great job that can serve as an example, because I think this is really top of mind. So I look at somebody like, I don't know if you were familiar with Dave Gerhardt. Dave Gerhardt is the former CMO at Drift, which is a well-known, Boston-based tech startup. He moved over to a smaller startup called Privy, huge personal brand. To me, before he moved over to Privy, to me, he was Drift. If I thought of Drift, I thought of Dave, because I love his content so much. It's just so interesting to me when you can think of a company brand, when you think of a person, and his ability to do that. And I think he's very much doing that now with Privy, because he has such a following. And then I look at, there's another tech company called Gong, if you're familiar with Gong. Gong does, they analyze phone calls for sales teams and give analytics and stuff. I know they do a lot more than that, but anyway. But Gong does this amazing job at distributing content that is very product driven. But when I think of Gong, and when a lot of people think of Gong, they think of their employer brand. It's because what they've done is they've enabled their employees to be as active as they want, to brand themselves, to talk openly. I just think that they have accomplished something really unique where it is, especially on their marketing team, it's product focused, but it's coming from people. And so you just connect the dots and go like, wow, like it just like tells the story of their employer brand. And then I think like on smaller levels, there's a startup in the US called Gravy, who employees are extremely active. I use them as an example all the time. Everybody from their CEO to their employees, they just speak their mind, and it's wonderful. And another company called Hirewell does that too in the US. And then a couple other examples on the company side. I'm not sure if you're familiar with hey.com. Hey was started, it's an email product, and it was started by Basecamp, which Basecamp became well known for their culture and stuff. So it started by Basecamp. And then I also think of Buffer. Buffer is a social media distribution tool.
Okay.
The thing I love about these companies is that when you look at their website, whether you're looking at the product side or you're looking at the career side or whatever, you understand who they are. Like you feel who they are. And you can do that too. Like I'll promote us too, Job Portraits. Like if you go to our career site and look at just anywhere on our site, like it's very human. It's very relatable. We get a lot of compliments on it. And I think like when you can accomplish that on any level of brand where somebody goes and goes, oh, I know who they are, you've accomplished a lot. And a lot of that, I think that's all accomplished through copywriting. And so I think there needs to be a big emphasis on copywriting, and especially on like the human side, speaking like a human. That's an art.
Yeah.
If you could, I always hope that you can kind of get to a point. I think that a few of the examples you shared there, Nate, you probably could, where you can tell the organization what the values of that organization are. They haven't got them written down on a values page. You see them in everything they talk about, in every word they write, in every freedom they give people. The values are written all over it, so you don't have to have it written on a wall in the office or on a page on the website. It's there for all to see. And that kind of depth, and that's where it's really rooted, not where it's been created. It's already rooted. You've got a created value, you have to stick it on a wall to remind people what it is. A rooted value, everyone knows because it shines in what you do. So the Accenture example, again, that's rooted in their DNA to have that idea and make it happen. Whereas in other tech companies, it wouldn't be, because it wouldn't feel natural for them to do it.
Yeah, great point. It's a great point.
I think you were speaking to another question that Neil's put in here, and it's something that I remember joking about like a couple of months into lockdown in the UK, of kind of like in the future, is when we turn around to candidates and say, do you have any questions? Are they going to turn around and say, well, what did the company do during the pandemic? Yeah. And Neil's question here is kind of speaking to that. What do you think the view on organisations' behaviour during COVID is going to have the impact on employer brand or reputation for the next few years? Because I feel like, especially for Gen Z, where I focus a lot on my efforts, they don't trust media as it is. They are very values and purpose driven, and they will notice when somebody is, for want of a better expression, coming out with bullshit. So what would you answer that question of Neil's there?
I think so I think back to the financial crisis when the banks screwed us and everybody said no one ever want to work for a bank again, and everybody wants to work for a bank again because they pay you loads of money. So I think that, I guess, there'll always be audiences. I think people who are happy to look the other way will look the other way. But I think what will be interesting is, as we hope the market starts to settle down. So I think all employers for a while will be fine, because the marketplace will be what it is. There'll be a lot of people that need work and will take work, and will overlook some of that principled stance to take a role that they need because they've got a mortgage to pay. They've got to make those kind of tough decisions. I think the challenge will come for those organisations 12 months in, 18 months in, when maybe things are a bit more settled when those people that made that tough decision have got somewhere else they can go, have got options, and are starting to remember that that maybe the organisation didn't do all of the right things for people at the time, really cracked under the crisis. And I understand that these are awful times for business owners and business leaders, so they're having to make some unpleasant calls. But I think those that haven't handled it very well, I think people will remember. I suspect they'll willingly forget for a period to get by, but I would expect them to remember, and I would expect certain commentators and influencers to keep reminding people about those that didn't do the job so well. And I think it will take those businesses a long, long time to build that trust back. And I guess, and Nate, you might know a bit more about this than me, but I would imagine those organisations that do get held up for having treated people badly will potentially also see an impact in their customer base, in their willingness of people to do business with them going forward, because that, how you treated people, how your employer brand stacks up, will still absolutely potentially impact on your business on your ability to do business going forward.
Yes, like on the company customer side, we as consumers have options. We have more options now than we probably ever have. And so I think we're all, not even outside of our bubble, I think we're all keyed into how companies treat people. It's so visible on so many levels, whether we're talking about corporations or we're talking about communities, societally, it's so visible how people are being treated, that whether it's conscious or subconscious, it's part of our decision making. And so when you have options, you have to respect the fact as a company that your buyer or your employee has options, that it's not just your one thing that is going to solve every problem, because there's another company who can do the exact same thing. And if they're treating people better, that's going to influence. Another thing too, going back to the employer brand side and how this relates to recruiting, I think it's really important for companies. I hate, transparency is a buzzword. I get it, but it's a buzzword for the right reasons. And companies who can be extremely transparent right now about how they responded to COVID, how that relates to what they've done to revamp their culture, what they've done to support their employees, whatever. If you can just say it, don't even wait for a candidate to ask you. Put this out in a blog post. Recruiters should be saying it to candidates. Here's how we responded, and just tell them. Don't even wait for them to ask, because it's important. And I hope that this is showing people that shit like this can happen. That whether it's a pandemic or whether it's a storm or whether it's whatever, stuff can stop. And this isn't going to be the only time that it happens. And so it's about a response, whether it's a response to COVID or something different. It's going to set the trend and help those candidates see like, oh, this is what I could expect if and when it happens again. Yeah,
exactly. It almost gives the lie. Well, I think it gives a lie to some of so every organization has values. A lot of those values are essentially exactly the same. And some organizations clearly that's truer of, because as the pressures come on, they have responded in a way that is in keeping with those values of being people-centered or being all about integrity or whatever. Others have kind of cracked, and that is potentially an example where the values or the culture have kind of been spoken about, have been constructed and created as something the way the business wants to see itself, but they're not really there, because then when the pressures apply, it cracks and it falls away. Whereas I think those that do have it really embedded, have really understood themselves and their problems and have worked to address them, have built something that's a little bit, and God knows, this has not necessarily been faced before, but is resilient enough to not immediately crack and fall down and go, oh fuck, how do we talk to people? I don't know, just chuck them out, just get rid of them. God, we've got no money coming in. It's a little bit more of a better way to, and again, that will last and stand them in good stead. And to Nate's point, absolutely. Then when people are looking and thinking, Christ, I don't want to join now, but if they're still around in 2 years, you know, I like that it's open, it's communication, I'll be clear where I was, whereas over here, I hear nothing and then suddenly my desk's gone. What's that about?
Yeah.
Totally. Thank
And
you.
thanks for the doom mongering about this not being the last time, by the way. Really like that. That's great. Lovely to hear on a Wednesday evening. Super.
Sorry.
Fine. It's true, but yeah.
I know.
We're coming towards the end of our time together, gentlemen. So, any closing thoughts or remarks to make? And Neil, any final questions that you've got for any of us?
The only thing I'd sort of put down here is when we were talking about sort of the future opportunities, was that this potentially is an opportunity to reset. So, you know, doom-monger Nate would tell you otherwise. Maybe, though, this won't happen to quite this extent again. It is an opportunity to properly reset. Everything's been kind of chucked up in the air for a lot of organizations. So there is the opportunity to show once and for all that employer brand is not linked to recruiting only, and that it's not a thing that you just do when you're recruiting, that it is a thing that has value all the way through, particularly when you're going through a challenge like this, where communication with people you have and keeping them close when they can't be close is just so important. That shouldn't just be owned by internal comms, that should be directed by the strategy behind the employer brand. So I think, you know, for all that it is awful and it is terrible, and we hope it never happens again, the opportunity is to really reset where in the organization the employer brand should sit, and how important it can be, and kind of like the remote working thing, it's clear that we can all do it. We've just not been forced to before. This is the opportunity to force, I think, employer brand a bit higher up the agenda, because no one's going to invite us up there, I don't think.
Yeah. Let's see. I think there's a big opportunity to tell more why, show less what, if that makes sense. The market really cares about why you do things, why you build the thing you build, why you do this unique thing inside your culture, why you do whatever. Like the why is what makes things relatable, but there's a lot of what. Mm-hmm. This is what we do. This is what we are. And I think there just needs to be a lot more why. And when you can start like digging deep into whys, it can just keep going. And I think that's where this idea that I have of like cultural journalism, journalists would probably have a hard time with that terminology, but this idea of storytelling at a deeper level, of being able to like act like a reporter, operate like a newsroom, and just find the stories inside your company that really show who you are. And I think if like with it, even if you can structure your department that way, amazing. But if not, even just having that mindset, like I'm a journalist here and it's my job to tell stories that aren't being told. You can go from like surface level type stuff to really deep, meaningful things that are going to connect in a completely different way. So that's, I think that's where the opportunity lies.
Yeah, I think that's right. I think the what doesn't stand you out. The why is the thing that stands you out, is distinctive. I think absolutely.
Yeah.
Totally. And I would kind of wrap that up and think way back in the start of my career as a kind of might sound a bit left field, but you'll get it in a second, kind of thing. When I started as a geography teacher, and I'd talk about push and pull factors and stuff, and there is a tendency to just, like say, just talk about rather than pull people towards and educate them. And when you do that, it really taps into that storytelling piece, that innate kind of desire to understand and to be curious, and there's a reason why people go down into YouTube rabbit holes.
Yes, you're right.
So because they are curious about something. They want to find more. We like information. We want to feel informed. And you're not going to do that if you keep just shoving something in somebody's face that they're not interested in, potentially.
And if you don't give them the information, then they'll probably apply and they might not be any good. And that's a horrible experience for them and for you and everyone. So why not just tell people? It's like,
why not? Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, thank you both for your time this evening and this morning for you, Nate, as well.
You're welcome.
And thank you for coming along and watching us and asking questions as well. I'll be popping this up on socials and everything so people can see and get in touch as well. So thanks a lot for your time and good evening. Good night.
Appreciate you guys.
Good night. Thanks,
Bye.
everyone.
Thanks, bye.